Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Ramstead, and I'm excited to be diving into the Minnesota FFA Conduct of Chapter Meetings, or COCM, Leadership Development Event orientation with you all. I'm assisting with the Parliamentary Procedure LDE this year, and we had put together a brief kind of orientation refresher on the LDE for our judges in that event. And I was asked to put something together for you all in Conduct of Chapter Meetings. So I'll kind of go over some of the similar information, but tailored specifically to Conduct of Chapter Meetings for you all. As you get closer to the competition, Ethan Dato and Joel Larson are going to be your point contacts as they're the contest chairs. But if you ever have any questions on Parley Pro, I'm always happy to help out as well, and I'll share my email and phone number here at the end. So kind of an overview of what we'll be covering today. So first we'll get started with the event flow, kind of looking at the different components of the competition and how it'll work. Then we'll kind of break down the three different judging roles. So we'll have three judges that are assisting with providing feedback to the teams in each of the rooms, some items to watch out for as you're looking holistically at the teams, and then some next steps in getting everyone on the same page for what we'll be seeing here in St. Cloud coming up shortly. So in the past, as we know, the event has occurred at the Minnesota FFA convention in April. So this is a new and exciting change for all of us with the leadership development events of everything happening in St. Cloud. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to help our young FFA members develop parliamentary procedure. The Conduct of Chapter Meetings event is limited to students in grades 7 through 9. So you're going to get to work with some of our younger FFA members, and they're always passionate and excited about everything FFA and parliamentary procedure. So you're in for a real treat. So to kind of give you a brief overview of where we're at and how the event is going to flow, students took an exam. They did not take a minutes practicum. That's a typo, but they took an exam the last couple of weeks, and the exam scores then seeded the students into their room. So the top team is going against different teams based off of their scores. And we kind of have that in a little bit of a matrix there. So it's an even distribution of teams. So each room is going to have between 5 and 6 teams. There are 3 rooms. There are 17 teams total competing in Conduct of Chapter Meetings in 2024, 2025 at the state competition. The top 2 from each of your rooms will then advance to the final 6. The final 6 will be hosted on Monday afternoon, and that will consist of our top 6 teams total. And the top team from that finals heat will represent Minnesota at the National FFA Convention in November 2025. So when the students arrive to you, they would have taken the exam, they've been seated in their rooms. We will provide you with those exam scores so you're able to tabulate those accordingly when you're determining your winners and the teams that will advance. But the students essentially are going to be arranged in a setup that looks similar to the diagram that we see on the screen. The president is going to be at the front of the room at some sort of table or lectern with their gavel. Teams are asked to provide their own gavels, but we'll have a couple extras on hand in case somebody forgets. And then we will have paraphernalia or station markers at each of the 6 positions. So reporter, treasurer, and sentinel will be on the left from the judges table, and secretary, vice president, and advisor will be on the right. There are 6 delegates or 6 members that'll be participating along with the president. So each team consists of 7 students. The FFA chapter advisor is allowed to be in the room, but they are not going to be seated at the table with the students per se, like we would see in a parliamentary procedure competition. So the advisor is actually being role played by a student in this case. We will have a spot for teams to put their clocks, or we'll provide a clock depending on how logistics work out here the next couple of days with securing timers. And then we'll have the judges table in the back of the room with the 3 judges there. So essentially what we're going to be asking our judges and volunteers to be willing to do is, prior to teams entering, we want to make sure that each of the following are at all 7 of the student stations. This will include an abilities card with the correct motion highlighted and no other marks on the card. A blank sheet of paper and a pen or a pencil will be supplied to each student. And between each of the rounds, we're going to want to make sure those are replenished and are in the correct locations. Teams will enter the room and go to the station that they have been assigned. At this point, we are not scoring teams and how they walk into the room. None of that matters. So they go to their spot. The president likely will indicate the members to sit, or the judges table can go ahead and make that indication as well. And within your group of judges, you'll probably want to designate a lead judge, likely going to be someone who has judged in the past, but if not, that's totally fine. This lead judge is going to then welcome the team and provide some basic instructions. First, you will remind students they will have 1 minute to silently review their ability cards. They are not to do any talking or signaling or anything at that time or any point throughout the competition with one another. Verbal cues, winking, none of that is allowed. They are not to write on their ability sheet, but they can write all over the blank paper that they are supplied. Teams will begin with the opening ceremony immediately after the 1 minute, so the judge will say time is in, and then we will begin the clock for the 13 minutes. That timer, as I said, will begin immediately when the president taps the gavel to start the opening ceremony. So immediately before they go tap, tap, the meeting room will come to order. We are now holding a meeting of the blank FFA chapter. So that's when you will begin your timer. The team demonstration, we will begin the timer before opening ceremonies. That's another typo, apologies, but before opening ceremonies, the timer must be visible to all members. Teams are limited to 13 minutes to avoid penalties. 2 points will be deducted per second over 13 minutes. So unlike parliamentary procedure where the event does not include the opening ceremonies in the time, conduct of chapter meetings, it is included in their time. So oftentimes teams are going to be going a little bit faster during the opening ceremonies, and that's okay as long as you're able to understand what they're saying and they're still saying the correct words. Each member should present their required ability if they have one. So there are going to be 7 students on the team. Up to 6 of them will be eligible to have a motion because the president will not be able to have a motion because they're leading the meeting. But of the 6 students, so the vice president, secretary, treasurer, reporter, sentinel, and student advisor, there will be 4 of those students that have a required ability that we bolded and or highlighted. At least one of these, maybe more, will be a debatable subsidiary motion because we can only score, according to Robert's Rules of Order, you can only debate a motion 2 times per day. So we wouldn't be able to have 3 debates scored in the competition legally with Robert's Rules of Order with no debatable subsidiary motions provided. Any member can present that main motion. The main motion presentation is not scored. They're reading it verbatim from the sheet. There will be 3 debates that are looked for each member. They again cannot have more than 2 per debatable motion. Debates that occur on undebatable or non-allowed motions do not count. So for example, if a member were to, or the chair were to call for debate on a parliamentary inquiry, for example, and members started debating the parliamentary inquiry, sounds silly, but if it happened, it would be no points, no score. And that might also be a deduction for the chair as well, if that is not corrected by the assembly. Each judge will also have something specific to look for during the demonstration. So you're not going to be looking at all of these things. Each judge will have a specific role, and we'll dive into that here in a moment. At the end of the presentation, so after the 13 minutes has expired, or when the team stops, if they go over 13, you do not stop them, but they will finish with their closing ceremony. That will consist of, we'll have a script for you, but that will consist of them reciting the Pledge of Allegiance as a team, and then the president formally calling the meeting adjourned. It will then open with oral questions. So each team member will be assigned 1 question related to parliamentary procedure, officer duties, meeting management, etc. Each member may earn a maximum of 10 points per question. Partial credit is allowed. So if you do award partial credit, please be consistent and fair from team to team. Questions may or may not relate to the assigned ability. They could relate, like I said, to the officer duties. Maybe it's not even the officer position they are. They could relate to the program activities. Anything really is fair game, as long as it pertains to the conduct of chapter meetings rules. Judges can take turns asking questions if desired, but only the motion's correctness individual or judge will be the one scoring. No other questions should be asked of teams aside from the ones that have been provided to you, and we will have an answer key that is available as well to verify the answer correctness. After the teams have finished their oral questions and each of them have individually responded, you will then thank the teams and remind them to not discuss the set near the other teams outside of the waiting room or outside of the presentation rooms, because we don't want teams that are about to come in to get a preview or unfair advantage of what they're about to experience. Teams are also going to be discouraged from shaking judges' hands to avoid any uncomfortable or awkward situations for judges who might be penciling in feedback or scores. So we will remind students before they go into the room to avoid shaking hands. Again, just to avoid those types of situations. The students know that you appreciate them, and we know that the students appreciate you for all of the feedback that you are going to be providing them. So we'll avoid the handshaking this year. When we're looking at scoring procedures, so we'll kind of walk through each of the three different judging responsibilities, but you will score during the presentation. They will not be recorded. So it's going to be important that you're taking note of the items that you're looking for. Teams will see your written comments. These are very valued by teams and coaches. Receiving a 45 out of 50 on the motion to recess is not as helpful as receiving a 45 out of 50 and a written comment that says the treasurer forgot to indicate how many minutes are on the recess. So having those feedback points is very important, more important than those scores for a lot of coaches. So please make sure to complete your scores without consulting with one another, with the other judges or any other coaches or individuals. We will then compile the scores onto the judging worksheet that we see here on the screen, and the conduct of chapter meeting shares. So Ethan and Mr. Larson will have an electronic scorecard that they'll use to verify math and everything. You can adjust scores from team to team as you see fit. So if you begin starting to be a little too harsh or too nice in the beginning, you can go back and adjust scores later. But if you do this, I would really encourage you, speaking from past experience, to take really good notes on what you're seeing, so you're able to be consistent if you do have to go back and adjust scores. I would consider starting pretty much everything as a middle level score. So that you have room on either end to adjust. Because if the first team is good and you give them all, near perfect scores on everything, but if the second team really blows you away and does even better than the first, there's not going to be very much room to account for those differences. All scores, again, will be entered to a spreadsheet to ensure math accuracy is verified. And the key here is that you're consistent. So we want to make sure that we're being consistent from team to team to provide a fair experience with the scoring. So our first judge, if you've never judged parliamentary procedure before, or you're new, or you don't love the nitty gritty of the motions or the debates, this would be a good position for you. This is the individual essentially evaluate our opening and closing ceremony. So each student is awarded up to 15 points for their opening and closing ceremony. And this is going to be a reflection not only on the recitation and having the words correct, but also on their conviction and enthusiasm as well, if you'd like to take that into account. I always told my teams as an ag teacher that opening and closing ceremonies are not simply an exercise in recitation. There should be some level of conviction and enthusiasm behind it. Again, as I mentioned previously, don't necessarily deduct teams if they're going fast. Like, of course, they're wanting to go fast because this is part of their 13 minutes timed. And this is the part of the competition where they go in knowing exactly what to expect, because that you can't really prep necessarily for everything that you're going to get for emotion, because it could vary from contest to contest. So, but opening ceremonies is the same whether you're competing at region, state, or national. So they have those down hopefully at this level. So if they're going fast and you can understand what they're saying, score accordingly. Conclusions reached. So especially in conduct of chapter meetings and parliamentary procedure, sometimes when we're having multiple debates, it can be tempting just to score the debates and give everyone the points. But we really need to be looking, especially in this judge one role, at what they're saying. Are they getting to the heart of the who, what, where, when, why, and how? Right? Are they actually discussing the issues and the problems and everything that is being arisen from the main motion? And they're really analyzing it carefully. Is their discussion logical? So this individual should be taking notes on what is being said and how it's being said. The debate individual, which will be coming here in a few moments, will be looking at each individual debate. So this judge one looks holistically at the entire conversation, the entire demonstration, and how they did. You'll want to use that comment box at the bottom to record what was said, to kind of give you a recap if you need to go back and adjust or account for anything later. This judge will also be looking at team voice, poise, and expression. Do they have good grammar when they were speaking? Were they confident? Did they have enthusiasm, verbals and nonverbals, gestures? All those things can be taken into account in your team voice, poise, and expression. As I'm sharing too, one other piece of advice I have on the conclusions reached scoring. If you write down who, what, where, when, why, and how on your scorecard and kind of bullet point what they're talking about, that may help you jot your memory and help you arrive at a score for conclusions reached. Generally speaking, whenever I've been in the judge one role, whether it's for parley or for conduct of chapter meetings, generally I would find my scores being in the mid, like the good or average range for most teams. And that way you can really reward those outstanding teams. Maybe you'll have one or two, for example, in your round with those higher points, because it can get really tight in some of these competition rooms. That's Judge 1. Judge 2 is going to be our debate person. So they are essentially going to be scoring the top 3 debates per member on debatable motions. So for instance, if a member were to come in and do 5 debates, which is pretty much unheard of in conflict of chapter meetings for the sake of this example, if they were to debate 2 times on a main motion, 2 times an amendment, and 1 time on a refer, if they're on the card, you will only score their top 3 debates, and those will be the ones that are scored. Try and take note again of what's discussed. So if you need to compare notes potentially with the person who did the conclusions reached, you can. But again, we really should be keeping that consultation to a minimum. We always want to score against the following things: debates that are not germane, right? So if our main motion is that I move that we have an FFA chapter party next Tuesday, and a student amends the motion to strike out Tuesday and insert Thursday, and then we hear debate on the amendment that is about how fun it would be to have an FFA party, that does not relate and is not germane to the amendment. The amendment debate should be focused specifically on the party being on Thursday. So score against those types of debates, debates that are canned. If we go in here and we hear, FFA members that are making some absurd quotes or comparisons or saying things that you wouldn't really expect a 7th or 9th grader to say, take note of that. We don't want to have canned or scripted debates. That's not the point of the competition. It's to evaluate student critical thinking ability. So if there's debates that are canned, you are subject to scoring them low. Debates that lack structure. Each debate is worth 15 points. So generally the way that I have scored in the past is I'm looking for 5 things in a debate. We have an opening statement, we have 3 kind of main body statements, and a closing. So each of those are worth 3 points. So beginning with an opening, like, I am in favor of this motion. I am strongly in support of this motion, something to that effect. And then 3 kind of key ideas in the middle of why I'm in favor of it or why I'm against it. Each of those can be valued at 3 points, and then 3 points for closing it with something like, so join me in passing this motion, or let's do the right thing and pass this, something to that effect. Now, I always told my teams as well, especially and sometimes depending on what the main motion is, it can get to be repetitive. We don't want to have repetitive debate. We want to have new, fresh ideas. So sometimes as a judge, you might have user discretion and value more. I would rather have 2 really strong middle points than 3 weak ones. So you can, as long as you're being consistent in scoring, that's what matters here. Any debates that don't add to the discussion or just simply repeat, like, as the previous speaker said, we don't want to hear that. We want your ideas. So if they do not add to the discussion, score those accordingly. And then any debates that are out of order are not scored. So if we hear a debate on a parliamentary inquiry, that is a 0. There's a suggested rubric on the bottom here. Again, I would find myself normally in the average to good range. And then for those really outstanding debaters, you can go to that excellent range if you feel inclined. The chair, obviously, as you can see, is on here. You will be evaluating the chair as judge number 2 on their presiding ability. So how they're handling the business. Are they using the gavel correctly? Are they calling on members fairly? Are they being tactful? How is their communication skills, leadership, poise? All those things can be evaluated there as well. So you would judge them out of 45 points. You could even kind of do it in like segments. So the first third, the middle third, and the last third, or you can look holistically and you think, okay, they averaged a 13 out of 15 and give them 13s across the board for a total of 39. That's up to you. Finally, our judge 3 is going to be our motions, correctness, and oral questions individual. So the abilities will be provided to you the day of the competition at your in-person orientation that you have, where Mr. Larson and Ethan will go over any final details. Robert's Rules of Order, I personally will have a copy, so if anyone needs to reference it, I will bring mine with. I'm sure others will have theirs as well. But Robert's Rules of Order has the correct form for each of the abilities. Conflict of chapter meetings only uses, I believe, about 10 of the abilities. So some of the more nuanced ones, like fixed time which to adjourn, call for the orders of the day, rescind, reconsider, lay on the table. Some of those ones are not in conflict of chapter meetings. They're very baseline to help our 7th through 9th grade members get their feet wet with Parley. So the motions are pretty straightforward in here, but we're happy to crank open Robert's Rules of Order if there are questions on that. We really ask you to avoid judging from personal preference. There is more than one correct way to demonstrate a motion. If they are not violating parliamentary law, they should be receiving the credit for doing the motion. So please set aside any personal preferences that you have. The competition is looking to evaluate their knowledge of parliamentary procedure, not how closely they can align with what our judges want or have seen before. And really on judge number 3 is going to want to watch out for precedence issues. So what I mean by this is, let's say that we have a main motion, and then the secretary amends the main motion because that's their assigned motion. And then during discussion on the amendment, the treasurer moves to postpone indefinitely. Well, that's out of order. You can't postpone indefinitely anything except for a main motion. So then you would want to take note of that and score accordingly. So this judge should be looking at the correctness of the motion and then how those motions are kind of playing together in the meeting setup. There are only 4 motions, as we've talked about. You do not score the main motion. Everyone should be able to do that because it's right on the card. But each motion is out of 50 points for a grand total of 200 on those assigned abilities. I will also note that between the 3 rooms for preliminaries, let's say, for instance, commit or refer is on the card. We're going to want to make sure that the secretary in all 3 rooms, for example, is the one that's doing commit or refer if that's who that emotion is assigned to. So between the different rounds, one of the judges is going to want to make sure that the card not only doesn't have any markings on it, but is still at the correct station marker. Finally, this judge will evaluate oral questions. These will be provided to you in advance with or at the competition site with the answer key. So you'll evaluate out of 10 points each of their questions. And again, this is individual. They're not able to help one another. This is a diagram that we don't use in parliamentary procedure LDE, but conduct of chapter meetings does have this, and I believe you'll have a copy of this. But let's say that there are several parliamentary errors that occur in a meeting. You can use this as a guide to kind of evaluate or deduct points from the overall total as well. And that was referenced on our first scorecard that we looked at. At the bottom, there's deductions for time, and there's a spot for deductions for parliamentary errors. And this is where this would come into play. So if you do find parliamentary errors that are on this list of options, kind of take note of those, and then you can work as a judging team to evaluate and deduct points from the total score accordingly. Some things to watch out for as we wrap up here: canned or unrealistic debate or motions that occur. We don't want fake. We want authentic students that are presenting the parliamentary knowledge that they've worked so hard to learn. Any issues with precedents that we have, like I mentioned with Judge 3, issues with the form and motion correctness. So for instance, on the motion to recess, if they just say, I move to take a recess, that is incorrect. We need to be stating the length of the recess and in many cases why we are taking the recess. So we want to make sure that we are taking that into account with our motion correctness evaluations. No additional motions besides the main motion on the floor can be done, with the exception of point of order and parliamentary inquiry, but only if they're absolutely needed, and they will not be scored extra points for demonstrating these items. Additionally, if point of order, for example, is assigned to the secretary, and then the president makes a mistake during the meeting, and the treasurer calls the president out of order, and it's point well taken, the secretary still needs to demonstrate a point of order at some point during that meeting. Same thing with parliamentary inquiry. So the person who has been assigned that motion must be the one who presents it during that meeting. Looking for voting and debate inconsistency. So for example, postpone indefinitely is a motion that kills the main motion. Hopefully the person who makes the main motion is not the person who's moving to postpone it indefinitely. Additionally, if we have people who are, everyone is for the most part is speaking against the main motion and we think it's a horrible idea, and all of a sudden we get to the time to vote on it and everybody is suddenly in favor of it, that can happen, but we should probably have some discussion as to why we're switching our sides before we vote. That could be a sign of canned debate, so kind of take note of that. Signaling or any unallowed communication between team members or with advisors is absolutely not allowed, so take note of that. Could allow for disqualification in the event. And then no writing on the abilities cards. So we should not be having students that are writing or making note on those. Between the different rounds, you're going to want to make sure that you go to the stations and that you have replenished the paper, and that you look at that ability card to make sure there's no marks and that the assigned motion is at the correct table or the correct station marker. So again, thank you so much for volunteering. We know that you all have very hectic and busy lives, and it's a crazy time of the year. So you taking the time to help evaluate this competition and provide these students with some awesome leadership experiences is so very much appreciated. More specific details about the setup of the competition and your abilities card will be provided at your in-person orientation right before the round that you are judging. You're welcome to contact Mr. Larson, Ethan, or myself with any questions that you may have. Again, Joel and Ethan will be your point of contact for conduct of chapter meetings, but you'll see me around at the competition as well, helping out with Partly Pro. Again, we really look forward to seeing you soon. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out. Take care.